Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Britain's sole surviving steam locomotives. Today's video idea actually came from you guys, so thank you so much to everybody who suggested this to me, and an extra thank you to those of you who actually started putting lists together of suitable locos for this video. It's really much appreciated, and of course today I'm doing the video. So the idea for this video was to take each loco in my collection that has one example preserved in real life, and I was going to run each of them for you and put a train with them and talk a little bit about their history and stuff. I thought, you know, there's not going to be that many. They will all fit into a video, right? Well, wrong. This is how many sole survivors there are. An absolutely monumental number. I'm shocked at how many there are. So I can't do that. If I decided to do a video of every single one of them, this video would be about 8 hours long, and I think you'd all drop dead of boredom. So I'm not going to do that. We're going to go through each example briefly, and then I'll run just some of them and talk about them. All right, sounds simple. Let's take a look at some sole surviving steam locomotives. So there it is, a sea of sole surviving steamers, and it's crazy to think that for every single model you can see here there is exactly one real life counterpart still in existence. Now I've tried to pick the preserved examples in model form where possible, but I don't always have those. So we're starting with this, the Midland Compound. The real loco that is preserved is number 1000 and it's part of the National Collection, but this one is 1119, so not exactly the same loco but the same design. The second loco is this. This is the Lnr D49, and the preserved example is at Bowness, I believe, and it's number 246 Morayshire. The next one is one that you'll all recognise, of course, but it is the sole surviving A3 or even A1 locomotive. This is the Flying Scotsman, of course, which is part of the National Collection, and it is the only A1 or A3 preserved. This is the next loco. It is the Gresley V2, and the sole survivor is also part of the National Collection, but it is Green Arrow, and I've seen that one at York myself, which is pretty cool. Then we have the Lord Nelson class, and the sole surviving Lord Nelson is also part of the National Collection, but my model here is Sir Francis Drake, and the preserved example is just Lord Nelson. Here's a surprise, only one of these left in real life. This is the N7, and the preserved example is number 7999 at the East Anglian Railway Museum. And then, of course, we've got the Secr D-Class. There's only one of these preserved at the NRM, and this is a model of it. It's part of the National Collection in miniature. Same with the next loco, which is of course City of Truro, part of the Great Western City class, and of course City of Truro is the one that is preserved in real life too, and that is obviously at the NRM too. The next loco is this, the T9, and again this one is owned by the National Collection. It's on loan from them, I believe, and the preserved example is this one, number 120, which is cool. Then we've got the Secr N class. The real one is actually part of the Swanage Railway, I believe. Don't think it's this version of it though. Next, only one Duke Dog still exists in real life. I think that is the Earl of Berkeley in real life, so again not my example, but still sole survivor. And then the next one is the Robinson 04 locomotive, and the real survivor is at Loughborough, and I do have some videos of her in the shed at Loughborough, so that's definitely one I recognise. And then the next loco is the War Department Austerity. Again, only one of these survived. The surviving one, I think, is it 5200, and it's at the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway, where the Railway Children was filmed, so that's quite an interesting one. Then we have the Raven Q6, and the surviving example is 3418, and that is preserved by the Northeastern Locomotive Preservation Group. And then, if we move over here, we've got an example of a Great Western 460, one of the early ones in fact. This is the Star class, and the preserved one is Lodestar, which is also part of the National Collection. Only one B12 preserved, of course. That's a great pity, isn't it? But at least we got one. 8572 is the preserved one on the North Norfolk Railway, although it travels around. Then we've got the Q1 locomotive, very beautiful bully design. I believe it's the first of the class that is preserved, also part of the National Collection, and it is running number C1. Then we've got a beautiful D11 locomotive from the Great Central Railway, and that is Butler Henderson. Well, my model isn't Butler Henderson, but the surviving example is, and that is, you guessed it, part of the National Collection. And then at the front here, we have a gorgeous, gorgeous loco. This is, of course, the C1 Atlantic, which lives in the same place. It's also part of the National Collection, and I believe this is the preserved example that I have here in model form. This is the NRM version of the Bachmann model. Up next, we have the Stania Mogul, which is owned by, or at least at, the Severn Valley Railway. Very lovely loco, that. The next one is the IVAT Class 4, only one of these, and that, well, the preserved one is 43106, and mine is 43160, so nearly, but not quite. And then the next one is the Lnr K1 locomotive, the preserved example being 62005. And then we've got the King Arthur class, only one of these survived. The real one is Sir Lamiel, and I think, was that one at Loughborough, at the Great Central? I thought there was a Southern 460 there, but it could have been a different one. And then this is an interesting one. Yes, there is one of these. Adams radial tank, and the preserved one is on static display, and it's number 488. And then we're going back up here with this. This is the Great Northern N2 locomotive, and the surviving example is 4744 on the North Norfolk Railway. And then we've got one of Bluebell's classic locos. This is the LBSC E4, preserved number being 473. And then here's a beauty. I'm glad one of these survived. We've got the LMYR Class 5, and the preserved example is 1008. And here's a very unique locomotive. Yes, it's the last surviving example of this class or design, but of course there was only ever one built in real life, so it's ultra unique. And I believe that this resides in a museum up in Scotland when last I heard, so it's a good job it's still around, not running though, of course. And then back up to the top again, we've got the Secr C-Class, which is another Bluebell locomotive. And then we've got the Collick class, or the Collick Goods locomotive, and that one is preserved on the South Devon Railway, number 3205. I have seen that one in real life. The next is another Great Western 060. This is the Dean Goods, and that one is preserved at Swindon, I believe, and it's number 2516. Then we've got a very beautiful, another 060, but this time an LNER, or in this case a North British 060, and the preserved example is preserved by the Scottish Railway Preservation Society, so it's a good job they did that. And here's another very, very lovely preserved loco. It is, of course, the Scottish 812 class, and my example is the same as the preserved example, number 828, and it's at the Strathspey Railway. J15 up next. Yep, only one J15 survives. The real one is on the North Norfolk Railway, and it's number 65462. Another LNER 060 up next. There's quite a lot of these preserved. This is, of course, the J27, and the real thing is preserved by the Northeastern Loco Preservation Group. So good job on those guys for keeping one around. A 1361 class still exists, of course, and the Great Western Society have preserved number 1363, so that's who you got to thank for that. And then at the back we have the 1P, or sorry, the 1F this one is, and it's from the Midland Railway, and the real thing that is preserved is at Barrow Hill, and it's number 41708. And then we have the E1, or the J72, and the preserved example in real life is number 69023. Glad to have one of those. Here's another one that you'll probably recognise. This is the J13. I think this is part of the National Collection. I'm sure it was at the National Railway Museum. It's number 8846 in real life anyway. And then we've got another Bluebell loco. I think this might be the last Bluebell loco of the day. It's the H class, and the surviving example is number 263. And then the last couple, we've got the Adams 02 tank engine, and I think the surviving example is called Calbourne, but mine is not. Mine is it Newport or something like that, number 34. But yeah, Calbourne is preserved. And then the final loco is the Webb coal tank, and the surviving example is owned by the National Trust, I believe. And it is this same number. It is this model, number 1054. So there you have it. What an incredible number of sole survivors, and so crazy to think that if just one more of every loco you see here was scrapped in real life, then they would be gone forever. So amazing that just one of each of these survived. So I'm going to choose some of these to run for you now, which I'm really looking forward to, just some good old-fashioned trains running. I'll put some realistic, or at least decently realistic rolling stock with them, and I'll also tell you about them. So here we go with the first one. So here comes my first choice now. It is the Midland Compound, not the preserved one in model form unfortunately, but certainly the class as preserved. So this was also known as the Midland Railway 1000 class, and these locomotives started life in 1902 when just 5 three-cylinder compound locos were produced by Samuel Johnson for passenger work. Richard Dealey further developed the locos before they were eventually rebuilt completely by Henry Fowler. The class was very successful. It was chosen by the LMS to serve as their standard express locomotive, as they were powerful, fairly fast, capable of up to 85 miles per hour, and they were quite versatile as well due to their modest size. 45 of the 1000 class were built in total, followed by 195 LMS compound locomotives built throughout the 1920s, which were essentially identical, which gave a total of 240 of this design overall, most of which did survive into the BR era. Here comes the second loco then, and for this one I've gone for the Bachmann V2, and the Lnr V2 was a design from the legendary engineer Sir Nigel Gresley, of course, and 184 of these unusual looking 262 Prairie tender engines were produced between 1936 and 1944. Despite being completely unlike most other tender locomotives in wheel configuration, the V2 was actually based on the Gresley A1 or A3 Pacifics, sharing Gresley's typical three-cylinder arrangement with them. But of course the driving wheels of the V2 were visibly smaller, thus dramatically changing the profile of the loco. Used for express mixed traffic work, the design proved to be extremely capable, and the class remained in use until the end of the steam era, with withdrawals not taking place until 1962. The final withdrawal was made in 1966, and now of course only one example remains under preservation. The next choice was a very easy one. It's one of my favourite preserved locos, and it is the C1 Atlantic, this being the Bachmann model. And these locos in real life were introduced to the Great Northern Railway in 1898 to the design of Henry Ivatt, and it was the first Atlantic design to be completed in the UK, beating the Lnr to the rails with their Atlantics. They proved to be considerably more successful than the acclaimed single-wheelers from the likes of Stirling, and they were easily able to handle the increasingly large trains of the day. The first 22 examples were built between 1898 and 1903, and they had a slightly smaller boiler than this version. In 1902, Ivatt introduced a larger version of his C1 design, which did incorporate the much larger boiler, as you can see here. The new C1 was far more numerous than the last, with 94 being produced in total, and many of these Atlantics actually survived beyond 1948 into the BR era. However, all of them had been withdrawn and scrapped by 1950, with only one survivor, and as we know that's number 251, and also one example of the smaller C1, later to be reclassified as the C2, was also preserved. Alright, well, how nice it is just to be running trains for the fun of it, and an interesting theme, and I can give the credit for that to you folks. So I'm going to get these engines off, and I'll put some different ones on, and we'll carry on running, because this is pretty fun. So I'll see you in just a second, don't go anywhere. More sole survivors on the way. So this next loco is one that I don't run very often, and I've tried to choose locos like that for this video. So this of course is the Stania Mogul. And the Stania Mogul was one of William Stania's first ever projects for the LMS, introduced in the October of 1933. Although they looked a lot like the Black Fives, they were actually introduced a year or so earlier. The class borrowed features and took inspiration from many existing locomotives, including the Great Western 4300 class, but mainly the very successful LMS Hughes Crab. These, however, used a higher boiler pressure and slightly smaller cylinders, but still retained the Fowler tenders, which were noticeably slimmer than the locomotives. 40 Moguls were built in total between 1933 and 1934, and the class survived right up until 1963 when the first withdrawal took place. By 1967, the final example had been withdrawn and scrapped, with only one surviving into preservation. For the next loco, I've tried to go with one that we don't see all that often, so it is the 1361 class, and I've chosen the DJM version, as that is the best version of the model in 00 gauge. And this class in real life was introduced in 1910 when 5 examples were produced at Swindon Works to the design of George Jackson Churchward. They were intended for shunting duties around docks and were therefore designed to negotiate extremely tight curves. Many aspects of the design were pretty old-fashioned, as it was based on the earlier 1392 class, which was built almost 40 years previously. They supposedly had Allen valve gear, which I'm not that familiar with, round-topped fireboxes and saddle tanks. When more were built in 1934, many of these dated elements were discarded, and such builds were fitted with Belpaire fireboxes and pannier tanks. Nevertheless, all 5 1361s survived for over 50 years, although, of course, only one of them remains in preservation. And the final sole survivor of today is to be this, the Adams O2 tank engine. And the design of the Adams O2 dates back over 130 years to the LSWR, when 60 of these were produced between 1889 and 1896 to the design of William Adams. The engines were built to take on commuter services as a replacement for existing locomotives. The BT well tank is an example, and the O2 had a small wheel size to maximise acceleration, but was still relatively lightweight and compact to ensure good route availability. The class also became well known for its use on the Isle of Wight railway system, when the Southern Railway sent a couple over there as a solution to the island's dire lack of locomotive power. These would become the final steam engines to work on the Isle of Wight, before finally being withdrawn in 1967. Back on the mainland, withdrawal took place quite a bit earlier, between 1955 and 1967, with only one example being preserved, which was indeed one of those Isle of Wight examples. Well folks, there you have it. That was a day with Britain's sole surviving steam locomotives. Comment down below, let me know what you think. Have I missed any out? I mean, it's possible. There's a lot of locos. There's a good chance I've missed one. So if you're aware of any sole survivors that I've got that I did not show, then comment down below. I'd be very interested to see if I have forgotten any. I think it's very likely. But I hope you enjoyed it. Just a bit of something different. Nice to see loads of engines in one video. Nice to have some trains running. Yeah, been a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video. Alright, cheers folks, see you soon.